Aloha and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Got Your Six podcast. This six-question podcast brings together high performers to share their methods, strategies, and ideas, delivered in an informative and, most importantly, actionable way that'll help you lead yourself and those around you from the battlefield to the boardroom. Coming to you every episode, I'm your host, Tony Nash. And into the breach.
Nothing mentioned on this podcast is an endorsement or opinion of the Department of Defense.
I got your six, we got your back. Got your six, we got your back. Got your six, we got your back. I got your six.
Some would say I'm starstruck today, but and by some that would be me. What an absolute treat we have today. Tony Holland is joining us. He works over at United Talent Agency. Probably never heard of it. You know exactly who they represent. We're not going to get into names because today we're here to talk about Tony, how he went from the 82nd Airborne, West Point, to being one of the most sought-after talent managers in the game. Tony, thank you so much for being here today, brother.
Appreciate it. Look, I don't know if I can say one of the most sought-after talent managers in the game. I'm just a measly assistant, a measly plebe again, but we're making it. We're making it.
Hey, we all got to call minutes at some point in our life, right?
100%.
And kind of learn from the ground up.
100%.
For those that don't know, at West Point, we have to, as a freshman, you call minutes to make sure everyone arrives at formation on time. So, it stills in us as West Pointers, and I'm sure other service academies, right? You have to start somewhere, and I think everyone can kind of relate to that. How has it been? You're closing out at the U, right? University of Miami. How has it been diving into something you've been passionate about so long when it comes to storytelling, but also kind of actually being in that, right? You prep, you plan, you get ready to do it, and now you're actually doing that thing. How does it feel to actually be in it?
Yeah, I think, Tony, it's really, for me, I'm at a really beautiful time in my life. You referenced calling minutes, and, it's interesting. I think as we go through life, we sort of hit these phases where, at some point we're always calling minutes again, right? Like we're learning something new, whether you're transitioning out of the service, you get a new rank in the service, or, you have a newborn, you're always starting these new phases in life. And I think for me, the duress of calling minutes at West Point, I think that duress is gone, but now, I'm at a really beautiful space. I'm kind of coming into this new space of doing what I feel like I'm called to do.
And I know you've always been a fan of storytelling. How did you incorporate that during your time, not only at West Point, but in the service, so you were able to kind of have that creative passion while still serving? How did you kind of balance the two?
Yeah, for me, storytelling is something that I never really, I think I always had an ability to kind of do it well, but someone else needed to pull it out of me. So when I was at West Point, I had a teacher, Anil Mukherjee, Professor Mukherjee. He just left. And, he told me that this is what I was supposed to do. And while I was at the academy, I never really, up to that point in my life, I never really saw that for myself. And when that, was sparked, when that catalyst was kind of awakened inside of me, it's something that I really, I think it's something that I'm still working out. How do you tell?
Absolutely.
How do you tell a story? And I think the key to any good story is there's conflict in there somewhere. And I think that, being in the service and beyond, that perpetual run-in with conflict is something that gives you ammunition, if you will, to fire when the time comes. So I think being in the service for me was really about, pulling on so many experiences that a lot of folks don't have the opportunity to witness, and trying to figure out a way to channel those emotions into a way that I can, communicate effectively with others.
And as you challenge those emotions too, you also, and I know this is always forefront of your mind from our conversations that we've had, you have this moral sense of responsibility and professionalism to make sure those stories are told in a way where it's not just attention grabbing, but it deeply connects with everyone, regardless if they've laced up their boots or not. How do you kind of tap into that?
Yeah, for me, Tony, that starts even before West Point. I told you before, I'm just a small town kid from Alabama with really small and intricate roots in a small black community in Alabama called Tuskegee. And, growing up, going to church with my parents and stuff like that, I was able to see some folks who had really encountered some, just some really tough circumstances in their life, whether it be poverty, whether it be, growing up in a state, rife with racism, and clinging to those roots down in small town Alabama. I knew well before I went to the academy that, I was going to be committed to something that was greater than myself, and also be committed to, advocating for those people that look like me. And, I think, when you have that sort of spirit about yourself, and I think so many West Pointers have that, it doesn't matter where we go, those sorts of things stick with you, and you're always working to kind of build off of them.
No, absolutely. And it, like you said, it's such a solid foundation that you're able to kind of, as this thing builds up, adapt, iterate, and see kind of how it all plays out.
Exactly.
Right? Because like you said, you've done a lot of different things. You studied law at West Point. Then you went on to go be in the 82nd Airborne. And then now you're coming out of into an industry that sometimes people can quickly turn an eye to and say, oh, that's just how they do it. But being a voice of change, to share the stories that are familiar to you, but maybe not familiar to other people, I think is particularly fascinating because it takes so much conviction on your part to be committed to tell that story.
100%. And I think it takes that same level of conviction from everyone involved in the storytelling process. We're talking about movies, right? Like, we're dealing with, actors and actresses who are pulling these emotions that they've experienced out of their life and giving them to us. They're constantly naked, if you will. And I think that deserves a stewards, and it deserves respect in a lot of ways, the same way that we respect those who have don that uniform and serve our country. So it's a different way of looking at service, but in the end, I think that's what it's all about, service.
And how have you seen it done where people are able to channel? I really liked how you talked about them being naked, right? Kind of coming in with past emotions and understanding to do an experience that they've never seen or been a part of. How do you help convey that when you do screenwriting and storytelling?
Yeah. Well, I think most folks in the space that I work right now in the talent agency, I'm an assistant in the motion picture talent department. And, I've really had a chance to interact with some amazing agents, as well as other folks around town. But, I think something that we're constantly trying to do, it doesn't matter who you are in the space, right, is you're constantly trying to kind of source material, source story. And, it's really like a feel. I think it's important to be able to certainly look at other people's emotions, certainly look at the work that various folks are doing across the industry, but really go with your gut and say, well, yeah, maybe this puzzle can be put together this way, but I think it really would look great if it was put together this way. The pieces are a little bit more malleable, and I think that um, that's a really good way to leave an imprint um, that maybe you haven't seen before.
I love the analogy of the puzzle, right?
Yeah.
And like, it's not there's no picture that you're ultimately, other than what's in your mind, that you're trying to create. So as you continue to source material and grow in this space, how are you challenging yourself to constantly source material that is maybe foreign to you based on your past experience?
Yeah, I think reading everything possible, and really just trying to develop a sense of what my taste actually is. Leaving, I guess that this can kind of go back into, leaving West Point, being, leaving the Army. For me, it's really been this deep dive into self-exploration, right? Like trying to understand self. And I think that with this job in particular, something that's really cool is I really learn a lot more about myself from reading and trying to understand the way that other folks are interpreting the world. And I think every day, I find something new about myself through someone else. Whether it's a self-tape submission for one of my boss's clients, or whether it's a new.
What's a self-tape? Sorry.
Yeah, so
unfamiliar with that term.
Yeah. So a self-tape in this new digital world, you used to have these casting auditions, but now with technology, basically it's the same thing as an audition, but it's an audition tape. So a client receives a few lines to read, and then they go ahead and read those lines and submit them to be reviewed by casting director, the whole nine. So you're seeing people's bare emotions on parts that they may end up doing or they may not, but there's a chance to learn there.
Have you ever self-taped yourself as you've told a story or written a story to kind of see how you experience those emotions?
When I was in film school, or in my first or second year of film school, during the pandemic, we were kind of locked down, and oddly enough, I did a short film called Self, and it was really it was a really therapeutic experience for me just to see myself. I'm not a huge social media guy. I'm not a guy that picks up the phone and does a whole lot of stuff where I see myself, but having the opportunity to be naked and not only see myself, but have other people see me, it did a lot of good for me. I think just moving forward in life. So, yeah.
And I think that's such an interesting piece, especially in a transitional period, right? Not only did we, in grad school with the pandemic going on, but like being able to capture where you are in time and space and understanding, hey, this is what I'm projecting, but what am I actually seeing for myself is super powerful. And I'm so glad we talked about the self-tape, because that's just such an actionable thing. You can just flip your phone around, do a quick, if you journal or whatever, or just how you feel, hit record. You don't have to play it for anybody, but you can just kind of watch it back and be like, oh man, am I really coming across this way? Or am I looking at just symptoms and not actually addressing the problem?
100%. Being, I think, Tony, being able to see yourself in a way that, you can't see yourself when you're just going through your normal day. There's a power and a therapy in that I think is untapped a lot of times.
Absolutely. And especially being, I keep going back because you're in the motion film industry, right? Like you're seeing the depiction of a story from a particular set of people and how they see the world existing in whatever this environment is in. And to be able to then go back and look at a very raw piece of film that's your own, it gives me like goosebumps.
Yeah, 100%.
You know, do you think that ability to kind of go back and do that audit, level the bubbles, as they say, of doing that self-tape has really improved your life as you've begun this next chapter? Or is there something else you've been able to kind of tap into as a behavior or a habit?
Yeah, I think it's a culmination of things. I think the conversations that come from allowing other people to see you, it can help you. For me, it's helped me kind of get things out that have just kind of been buried inside. And I think that in itself is something that, I didn't feel super comfortable with during my time at West Point, during my time in the Army. I think for a lot of folks that go to the point, it's very easy for us to see the beautiful part of our institution, because it is a beautiful institution, but me, being a black kid from Tuskegee, Alabama, and going to high school in Lee County and seeing, Lee Barracks, and then walking past the monument where it says, a cadet will not lie, cheat, steal, or tolerate those who do. You just recognize the small bits of inconsistency. And, those things, they can force a person to kind of shut down and not feel like they can be vulnerable. And, I think for me, there's always been a real desire to be vulnerable and be able to express your full self, but not feeling that, for me, I think it kind of sent me into a space where I wasn't the healthiest version of myself. But, I've been so happy about, being able to say that I'm a West Point grad, and looking at the complexity and the depth of who we are as an alumni base, and recognize that, I'm not alone. And, I went to the best institution in America and throughout the world, and can say that unequivocally.
Now, and I wholeheartedly agree with you, what has allowed you to build that psychological trust, not only with yourself, but externally, to allow yourself to be vulnerable, especially now, having kind of looking back and then also looking forward while being present? So a little bit of omnidirection.
Yeah. I think, first it's my classmates, it's my family, it's my friends. And really, I think it comes down to just being honest, not living a lie. And I think being able to be honest and be authentic and not be deemed someone that is crazy, that helps bolster those emotions and that sentiment. So, for me, just being able to communicate and not feel like I'm, insane for feeling the way that I feel is something that it helps. And
like we said, that's an iterative process, right? You got to have like a trial and error along the way, right? It's not always going to be great.
Yeah.
It's not always going to, and sometimes it is, right? Where has a failure along that journey ultimately led to the success you see today?
Yeah. I think, my best, and I don't even want to call it failure, right? Like one of my best experiences post-Army, right, was myself and one of my closest friends. Jonathan Lehman, we're classmates. And when I came out of the Army, Jonathan was living in LA. And, Jonathan, he's a Renaissance man, but at the time, he's focusing on his music career. And, I found a buddy through high school who was doing a sales job up in Bay Area, California. And I said, Jonathan, we should do this. At the time, Tony, I was actually already accepted to a screenwriting program in North Carolina, UNC School of the Arts. And I declined it to go on this, who knows where mission with Jonathan. And we lived in the Bay for 1 year. And I probably learned more about myself, and I don't want to say failure, but I want to say, definitely a lot of growth of self in that time frame that I think probably during my whole time frame in the Army, weirdly enough. And I think a lot of that growth and that learnedness, if you will, came from going into different people's houses and, selling them windows and doors. And, I probably went into over, 150 people's homes in the Bay Area, California, all over the Bay. And, got to go in and just talk and engage with people. And that experience, I think, was an amazing experience to reintegrate me back into civilization, if you will, from being in the service. Because I dealt with some folks that were so all over the spectrum of personalities and occupations and everything that, I really started to feel like I was just a normal person again. And I really needed that before going into film school.
The imagery there is what I find most captivating and also extremely beautiful,
Yeah.
right? Of selling windows and doors to people all over from many different backgrounds, right? Which allows you as a storyteller, right? Like, is this a door where you kind of stop someone from seeing something, or is it a window where you allow them to see like the vibrancy and the beauty of what lies beyond or where they're at?
Yeah, 100%.
I don't know how you tied that all together, but you did it, and I love it.
I appreciate it.
Tony, as we wrap up, right, I have to ask one final question. You being a Sixer, you know what's coming, right? Tony Holland, how are you better today than yesterday?
Yeah. Let me think for a second. How am I better today than I was yesterday? I think that today I recognize that today is all I have. Yesterday is gone. And everything, for the most part, that came before, I don't want to say it's irrelevant, but for the most part, it won't help me today and it won't help me tomorrow. And I think also being present in today, I recognize that tomorrow isn't something that I can make come faster. It's going to come when it comes. So I think, when thinking of, how am I better today than I am or was yesterday, I think I'm present in today. And I think living life that way, going forward, it makes me better every day because I'm present. I'm aware of trying to find that balance that I think we all need to be the best versions of ourselves. And I think it's taken me a long time to realize that there's a lot of beauty in that. So yeah, I think I'm better today because of that.
Was there something deliberate you did today that allowed you, if you felt off balance, to kind of bring you back?
I don't think so. I wouldn't say so.
Okay.
I wouldn't say so.
Okay.
I wouldn't say so. I'm out here California time, so we just hit lunch is next. So maybe lunch will make me feel like it's an even better day.
There we go. Love it. Tony, where can people go to find out more about what you're up to, what you're doing? I know you're not a big social media guy, but where can people go to connect more?
Yeah, you can holler at me on LinkedIn. I love telling my little cousins that. They're like, we never see you. I'm like, listen, you guys got to create a LinkedIn. It's never a better time. It's never a better time to start. But yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. You can, you can definitely message me on there. I'm active. But outside of that, hopefully the proof is in the pudding here in the next couple of years with the work that's done around town.
If you haven't heard of Tony before, you will going forward. Trust me on that. Tony, thank you so much for sharing your methods, your strategies, your insights, and of course, thanks for having our six, brother.
Thank you, Tony. I really appreciate it.
I don't know what you've been told, Sixers, but the lawyers would like us to remind you that the views, opinions, and comments expressed on the Got Your Six podcast are solely those of the hosts or guests, to include current and previous Department of Defense employees, and should in no way be considered the opinions of or endorsements on behalf of the Department of Defense or any of its components, divisions, contractors, or other current and previous staff members.